Josh Siegel with the Daily Signal. Today we're going to be talking about whether recreational marijuana should be legalized. The debate is going on between Christine Roussel, she's with Town Hall, and she is in support of recreational marijuana, legalizing it. And we have Nate Madden of Conservative Review, who is opposed. So we're going to start with Christine, who's going to tell us her point of view. Go ahead.
I think that marijuana should be legalized because it's safer and less harmful for society and for a person than substances that are already currently legal. I think that ruining someone's life and putting them in prison for possessing a plant is not a good use of personal liberties, and I think that prohibitions don't work. We saw this in the 30s, and we're seeing it today with marijuana.
Very good, and why is she wrong?
Responding to that initially is the idea that prohibitions don't work is that if you mean that things still happen despite the fact that there's a prohibition, no, then prohibitions never work. The initial prohibition was, thou shalt not eat the plant, it was about a plant. The initial prohibition given to us by God was, you don't eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So mankind was fallen because of the possession of a plant there. So now the prohibitions don't work if it's on the grounds that things still happen despite prohibitions there too. Now, when we say that marijuana is safer and overall better for society, we really need to tease out what we mean by this. What do we mean by safer? What do we mean? Are we looking at raw statistics and only looking at outcomes? Because if we only look at outcomes and we only look at sob stories of people, the mythical amount of people who have, the guy who smoked one joint and ended up getting 3,000 years for possession, if you look, it's a leftist argument. The argument that we should change these laws, that we should alter our stance on what we now consider a non-permissible vice. The idea that we should change this to a permissible vice because of a sob story and because of outcomes alone is a leftist argument that I don't think conservatives should buy into. I think we need to really and truly evaluate why we make this argument. So I'm still waiting to hear some more teased out responses.
Well, if you're going to use the biblical argument, that was one plant, it was an apple or a potato, depending on your translation of the Bible, and it said earlier in Genesis that God made the plants for everyone to use except for that one tree from the tree of knowledge, which was not, to my knowledge, a marijuana tree.
Well, true, no, I'm not using a literal.
No, I mean, but if you're going to pull up the Bible, literally God made all the plants for humans to use.
Also, hemlock and arsenic are also for our use. Nightshade is also for our use. I mean, it doesn't mean that we should create license here to actively use hemlock. Now, I realize that marijuana is by no means as dangerous for human beings as hemlock, arsenic, or nightshade, but not all plants are created equal here.
No,
let me ask. My first question. Marijuana is kind of part of this overall criminal justice reform debate that you're seeing happening. We have 4 states in the District of Columbia that have legalized in some way recreational marijuana. The argument that marijuana, that arrests harms disproportionately African Americans, and this is part of being fair. I mean, how do you respond to that line of thinking that we need to be more fair? We shouldn't be punishing some of these lower level offenses like possessing marijuana or using marijuana.
If we're looking at federal statistics, I think we really need to break down, all right, so what else is happening in addition to marijuana? I mean, are there higher numbers of African Americans in prison? Yes. All right. Does that necessarily mean that marijuana laws are intrinsically racist? No. You have to actually look, all right, so what else is happening in these situations? Are there ancillary crimes that happen in addition to marijuana possession here? And we're talking about federal law specifically, like, it's very difficult to find somebody who is serving a federal sentence off of simple, low-scale possession. Usually what we're dealing with when we're talking about the federal debate especially, and we're talking about these really big three strikes, I think we're talking about people who they've got a lot on them. This is distribution here, and I'm sorry, a lot of bad things happen in addition to drug distribution.
No, and I'm not going to argue with that, but there's whites smoke marijuana at the same or higher rates than African Americans, yet more African Americans are in prison for it. That doesn't make any sense, and I think that there is a flawed law, and I think that a person shouldn't have their life ruined over possessing a plant. What I do in the privacy of my own house, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, shouldn't be any of your business. It's a civil liberties issue.
But are we able to actually nail down, have conservatives been able to actually locate why the reason for this statistic? Do we have a reason that this statistic exists?
There's more likely an aggressive police force in the inner cities, which would target African Americans by default based on demographics of those areas. I'm from rural Maine. We don't really have an aggressive police force. Nobody I know has been arrested for marijuana. Yet, when you have police forces in the inner cities, like in D.C. before the legalization, people were getting arrested and putting in jail for it.
I mean, right, but why would the more aggressive police force be in the inner city? Is it possibly because that more violent crimes are happening in these areas, or we do have higher crime areas that require more policing?
Does marijuana make you violent? Because it doesn't.
No, I'm not saying so, but I'm saying there are ancillary things that add to the statistic, rather. There are outside factors. It doesn't exist in a vacuum here.
I mean, let's say momentum continues with the legalization. movement? I mean, what does it look like if, let's say, in 10 years, you know, a majority of states have legalized recreational marijuana? What does that look like? You know, how do you see that playing out? What's different now?
Well, if we look at the initial indicators from Colorado, it doesn't look that well at all. We are seeing a major increase in the homeless population in Colorado. We're seeing a major increase in hospital visits from out-of-state visitors. And the myth that somehow that the tax revenue from marijuana sales is going to make this thing pay for itself or create a lot of revenue, it's just simply not happening. Now, whether that's from the tax scheme itself, like the scheme itself has a lot of problems based on how they're actually distributing and selling versus how they're sending out these licenses. They're doing that. But at the same time, we're not seeing the positive results in Colorado. We can, again, looking back at the health effects, the effects on the homeless, and the really
Couldn't that also just be a magnet effect of people are being drawn to Colorado because of those laws? It's like it's a chicken and egg issue. Like, people aren't becoming homeless because of weed. They're trying to go to Colorado because it is legal there. They're drawn to Colorado. Colorado's tourism has increased, and its DUI rate is the lowest it's been in decades. That's a positive for marijuana legalization.
So from your side, if more states are legalizing, what are we seeing?
We're going to see more jobs. The legal marijuana industry is a huge cottage industry. You'll have people that are growing the plants, using other marijuana paraphernalia like baking, like baked goods and other like edibles. The glass industry, so artisans and stuff, those jobs will all increase. Right now, these jobs all exist in society right now, but they're completely off the books because you're under the table. You can't put "I grow marijuana" on your IRS form. That doesn't work. Those operations will expand if marijuana is legalized, which is more jobs for, especially in rural states like my home state of Maine, and it could make towns like more attractive to people if like there is that industry in the area, and it would help raise unemployment rates, which right now rural states are doing really rough with that. So this could be a way to make things better in that department.
Yes, but at the same time, the question I would come back to is it still just to create license in this situation? Is it necessarily a good idea to create a permissible vice for something that is shown to lower IQs permanently, for something that is shown to have, in most cases, actually have a more detrimental effect on the lungs than actual tobacco cigarettes? Something that is shown to suggested to have a more detrimental effect than alcohol in the brain, and it's something that we really can't actually compare to alcohol. It's a psychoactive drug. We can't compare it to nicotine, which is a stimulant. It's a psychoactive drug. It exacerbates cases of generalized anxiety disorder. It exacerbates schizophrenia in a lot of different ways. Yes, we can make a lot of money off of it, but is it intrinsically just to do so?
Got to cut it there. It's been a good debate, and now it's up to you to decide. I luckily don't get to pick the winner, so go on dailysignal.com and choose who you think had the better debate. So thanks for listening.